Welcome back to Chapter 1. This is a podcast where we talk about media, primarily film, books, and music. And we look at it through the lens of life, this human experience, and everything that we're going through as these energetic, physical beings on this planet. So today, I haven't recorded an episode in a while, and I'm really excited about this one because the content that I'm talking about today is so important. All of this media that I go over is important in one way or another, but this one kind of hits home for me and also has so much weight behind it for a lot of different reasons. So let's get into it. Okay, we're talking about Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. Hell yeah! For those of you who do not know, this is a poetry book and was written in 2014 when the author was 19 years old, which to me is just, sheesh, I wish I was making stuff like this when I was 19. I just had no idea. I was creating when I was 19, probably actually a lot more than I do now, but the quality of my work when I was 19 doesn't even compare to what I do now, in the sense that I feel like my work now has so much more meaning behind it and intention. So it's fascinating to me that such a young being can produce something this impactful, this profound. But when you dig into the history of this person, it actually becomes pretty clear as to why she has such a touch on the pulse of life and creation. Milk and Honey is a small book filled with a lot of different poems that touch on a lot of different topics, but primarily from my perspective, it's about a breakup, which is relatable. We all do it, whether we are the ones who are being broken up with or are breaking up with somebody. It's something that the majority of us go through. I shouldn't generalize and say everybody goes through it, but I think as humans, I think the majority of us experience this. So this book has potential to reach a lot of different hearts. But I think what I like about this book is that it's so raw, and I could find myself in every single word. Even if the poem had nothing to do with what I've experienced in my life, it still felt like I could relate to it. So maybe that's saying something about the collective energy here. Who knows? But Milk and Honey has 4 distinct parts to it. They each break down a certain stage in the relationship / breakup. And these poems just have so much to them. Whether it's about the initial introduction to somebody and the energy that's exchanged there, whether it's about being with somebody long term and the hum of the relationship that remains, or whether it's post breakup, the day it happens, minutes after it happens. Each of these poems just hold so much. They're so dense with humanity and this experience that we're all going through. Rupi has a bit of a unique history, and I want to be very, very delicate with the amount of information that I pass on about her experience, simply because I feel like there has to be certain consideration to it and respect. So the basics are, when she was very young, very, very young, she had to escape her country due to genocide. And a lot of these poems, I think, have a little bit of a dash of that. It's really hard to believe that they don't, considering the heaviness of that experience. I think when we go through trauma like that, we almost just can't help it. It just bleeds into everything that we do. And that's not a bad thing, and it certainly deserves respect. And I don't want to boil Ruby down to this one experience that she had in her life, but she does make a point to speak about it in the preface of the version of this book that I have. Originally, I read a version that did not have a preface, and I had no idea. Or I knew something had happened, but it wasn't like laid out for me to read and comprehend. From my perspective, when I first read this book, it was just about a breakup, and yeah, there were hints at like past traumas and other relations that inspired her romantic relationships, but I don't think I completely comprehended that there was something so massive as this. While I think that does influence some of this work, I don't want to boil it down just to that. When I think about a 19-year-old sitting down and writing about what is in this book, it blows my mind. I have so much admiration for that, simply because it's something that I didn't have access to when I was that age. She goes over a lot of concepts that have taken me a very long time to be introduced to and to accept or not accept. And it just blows my mind that a being could be at that level of consciousness at such a young age. But I think that reveals, my experience and her experience and how different they were. And I can only imagine, what her consciousness level is now. And I hope it's a level that she's comfortable with and loving. But I admire that because it means something to me, because I've arrived at these ideas and have had time to consider them and apply them to my life. Yeah, I would love to hear how she operates now. What else has she learned? What other wisdom is she holding on to? What other wisdom is she sharing with people? And I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for more of her work and more of her writing. But yeah, this compilation of poems is so relatable and human, and certainly focuses on love and how sometimes we can just give ourselves away to someone completely, which isn't bad, but there is part of me that believes that when we do that, we certainly abandon a big chunk of ourselves, because that's what we were told, and that's what generations before us were told, or at least from my perspective. I wasn't I wasn't around when my parents were raised. I don't know what they were told. I don't know if anybody in their lives ever sat down and explained to them, this is what a relationship is like, blah, blah, blah. I'd love to hear those conversations just to see how different they are. From my perspective, previous generations found a partner and had a family, or they didn't, but the two individuals in that partnership, we're thinking of traditional dynamics here, would commit themselves to each other and almost abandon their independence. Now, this is extremely revealing to the types of relationships that I have had access to throughout my life. If I were raised somewhere else, in a different household, in a different culture, I'd probably have, I would have such a different perspective. But from my experience, these are the types of relationships that previous generations were dedicated to. And not everybody was, right? We're not generalizing here. We're just saying the majority of human beings follow these relationships and dedicated themselves to the other person to the point of almost abandoning themselves. Is that wrong? I don't know. Is that right? I also don't know. Life is just unfolding in the way that it's meant to, and we have the opportunity to decide which way feels right and which way feels wrong, and then take action as to how we want to feel about that and handle it and move forward in life. So in Milk and Honey, Rupi does go over those concepts. You know, the idea of pouring yourself into another human being and leaving behind yourself, which, thinking about societal dynamics, is very romantic, right? It's a romantic thought to step away from yourself and pour yourself into this new person or new dynamic and commit yourself to that. My perspective is that you can have a relationship with someone but remain in a healthy relationship with yourself. I think healthy independence is an interesting dynamic and is making its way into current relationships, and obviously shows my relationship with independence and dependence. Because there's something that has to be said about relationships, and that it is kind of like you're stepping into this dynamic where there's an energy field between you and this person that you've decided that you want to be around. And in my brain at this current moment, it's kind of like you are somewhat leaving behind the version of you that was there before them. And you are stepping into this new version of you with the other person. This sounds like dependence, doesn't it? But I think with the right person, that's not going to be a problem. And I think that we discover that as we work through these relationships and these dynamics. There traditionally is such a focus on being in a relationship, and that's the only thing that can make you happy, and blah, 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 blah. And it's just, we're shifting. We're shifting away from that mindset. Yes, romantic relationships are important, but they are not the end-all be-all. And I heard this idea about decentering romantic relationships from your life and kind of evenly spreading. Well, I guess to me, decentering a romantic relationship means spreading love across all relationships that you have evenly. It is not abandoning all relationships in your life to honor a romantic relationship, which I haven't experienced in my life personally, so I can't actually say how I would feel in that kind of dynamic or in that mindset about romantic relationships, because in my brain I am a romantic, and pouring myself into someone, there is an appeal to it, but I want to also be really mindful and have my independence, and I want my partner to have their independence, and I want us to just like coincide in that way. Yeah, I think that with the dating world right now, there's a lot going on. There are a lot of traditional things being broken. There are a lot of new things coming in, new concepts coming in, and it really boils down to what we desire in our core. And I think for the majority of us, that is love. And right now in my brain, I'm not sure if that's romantic love or like the universal love, you know, the love that kind of like holds everything together in this physical plane. The atoms that sit between you and everything else that's out there, you know, those atoms are they love? I don't know. Could be. But yeah, I think to kind of circle back to the whole reason I'm speaking about these concepts, Rupi does have an awareness of romantic, platonic, familial love and relationships. And she kind of walks us through all of these experiences that she had with this being in the beginning, middle, and end. And then she also walks us through the self-healing that came because of that. I wouldn't doubt if Rupi, since releasing this, has just attracted these expansive relationships that have helped her through whatever is going on in her life, you know, or helped her expand even further. This poetry hit me on a different level because I could see myself in the author. Sometimes I wonder if other women or other beings, other humans, are raised to be quite romantic, and now we are experiencing this shift. And there's parts of us that want to hold on to the traditional things because that's what we're programmed to like or to feel warm about. And we are in this time that just feels so different than what we're used to being taught. But truly, I think we are heading in a direction that works for everybody. And as a gentle reminder, you are here to experience this life in the way that you desire. So even if what I'm saying today doesn't resonate with you at all, then cool. I'd love to hear what does. All in all, I highly recommend this book. Some of these poems are 4 words long and they just hit you so hard. Because I think when Rupi was writing this, there were literal blood, sweat, and tears that went into the ink here. And if I'm pulling in my logic that I hold around sound healing and the research that has gone into concepts like when an artist records a song, if they're in a certain emotion, that emotion is literally going to be recorded into the song that they're creating, which makes a lot of sense, right? When you put a sad song on, you're sad. Not just because of the lyrics, but because of the person that created that song. They were more than likely sad when they recorded that song. Whether it was intentional or unintentional, it's there, I think. And I think that goes with writing, too, and honestly, any kind of creation. And I very much believe that we are constantly creating energy, constantly creating creations. I think that anything that we do is a form of creation. Artistic creation, to some, yeah. I mean, to some people, there is an art to filing taxes. There's an art to gardening. There's an art to teaching children in the school system. There's an art to flying an airplane, to driving a taxi. I think we are genuinely always creating, and we all just tick at different speeds. I am very visual. I love creating visual art, but I'm also someone who doesn't do that for a living yet. To bring it back to my point, I think that when Rupi created this, she was experiencing this deep, deep human feeling. And I think that feeling is translated onto these pages. And then when we read them, we're almost stepping into her brain space, which is quite magical if you think about it. It's almost like a window into that person's being, which is pretty magical. Milk and Honey is part of a series of poetry compilations. I believe there are 3 books that she has released that all kind of intertwine. And I have read the first and the second and have not read the third yet, but I intend to. And Milk and Honey, I think I consumed it so fast. I think I read this in 2 hours because I picked it up and something hit me. You know, it felt like I had never read poetry before, and that's because the timing of it was just so perfect and aligned. Because everything that I was reading in her poetry was something that I had been through or I had seen. And it was just so easy for me to go, yep, that's a human thing. I'm a human being. I'm glad to be here. So yeah, I even if you don't like poetry, I mean, it's not a hard read. It's very consumable. There's a lot of reflection on how her relationships growing up affect her relationships now, how her trauma has affected those relationships. And she just writes so beautifully and simply, and it's so consumable but impactful. And one of the more fun things that I read about her writing is that she takes inspiration from her mother language, which only uses periods. There's no other punctuation or massive guidelines to how they write. And she utilizes that in this book, which I think is just such a beautiful nod to her roots. So it's fun. It's really beautiful. It's really feminine. But also, masculine in its own way. And I think it's huge. Not only in the sense that so many people have purchased and read it, but in the sense that it is so human. So please do consider picking up Rupi Kaur's Milk and Honey. I can't recommend it enough. Yeah, sit yourself down with some other comfort and just experience this book, and then go off and read the rest of them. If you've sat through this episode with me and my just totally wild ramblings, thank you so much. This podcast has created such a warm space for me to just talk, which I know doesn't sound like anything insane, but it just feels so nice to be here and to read comments that are really engaging, and to hear that it brings some people some form of peace just really makes me happy to be here and to be doing it. Plus, it's just such a fun little experiment with audio expression. Again, this is Chapter 1 Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.